The most interesting thing to me is the fact that I don't think the messengers even realize to this day how they were duped. And they were absolutely duped. They were gaslit all along the way. They were paraded around as if their voice actually mattered. It was as if they were going to listen to the will of the messengers. Each one of these steps, I thought, okay, surely the messengers are going to go, wait a minute, who's calling the shots here? I thought the messenger body was telling the head what to do, but it's not that way at all. You are still being controlled. Your will does not matter to the general convention. It does not matter. And it's being proven over and over again. And until you get angry about that and take control back, there's going to continue to be decisions made that you're not 100% a part of or even behind. And and honestly, having your will dismissed like that is the very same thing that's happening to us as survivors. We are being dismissed. And that's what we continue to tell you during these years of begging for reform work, is that they are dismissing our claims. There's a seed of darkness and destruction within that convention that needs to be uprooted. And until that happens, we're going to just keep having these conversations.
Church Leaders here. I'm with Tiffany Thigpen. Tiffany, you are a sexual abuse survivor. You are an advocate. We have talked many times. We've been friends over the years. Most of the time, it's the reunion time that I get to see you at the annual meeting, and this year, that is not going to be the case. We're going to get into that in a second. You were named one of the 10 people named in the SBC apology given in the resolution that was titled on lament and repentance for sexual abuse. That was done at the meeting in June of 22, if I remember correctly. I want to ask you, since you're not going to be at the meeting, I wanted to meet with you. I wanted to make sure that your voice was heard. And we want to start off, and I want to ask you a few questions. The first one, since you decided not to attend the SBC annual meeting this year, for the first time, oh man, many times, many years,
Yeah.
Tiff, was there a single defining moment that led to this decision, or was it a gradual process? Like, what brought you to the point to say, I am not going this year?
Yeah, I'm definitely having to eat my words a little bit because the year prior, I did a kind of a public pronouncement that I would be there. I would continue to show up no matter what. Yeah, so I proclaimed that pretty loudly. And then last year, at the end of the convention, we were sitting in the survivors' room speaking to each other. And there was this level of devastation that hit us. And as we were sitting there talking amongst ourselves, it felt like a funeral in the room. It felt like a death. It really, really did. And we sat amongst each other talking that what what's the point? Where is there to go from here as far as the SBC is concerned? Not that you give up on survivors or reform work or advocacy, but there's no point in us coming and bearing our souls there anymore and being present and so much trauma that is brought on us by being there, that it just felt pointless. So at that point in time, I think we kind of all discussed whether or not we would be coming back. It was mentioned by several that we probably shouldn't come back. We should spare ourselves the pain and the hope, just continuing to put ourselves on the line for that hope. In the end, my personal decision was, and commitment to myself was, that unless over the next year the messengers rose up, if the messengers got angry at being ignored and dismissed, if they kind of rose up within the convention and went against the entity leaders and the people that had made these decisions, that if there was that groundswell that began to happen where I saw a turnover in the messengers, then I would come back. And unless I saw that, I wouldn't be back. So I committed that to myself. And this year, of course, that's not what we've seen. So I have spared myself. And in current days right now, I'm so thankful that I spared myself personally that moment of coming back.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I just want to say that you will be missed. But I
Thank you.
understand. I understand what and why you made this decision, and I'm glad that you did so for. We'll just say for your mental health,
Yes.
that I know that you and I have talked about before.
Yes.
You know, Tiffany, do you believe the SBC has, do you believe the SBC has done well with its sexual abuse reforms since the release of the Guidepost Solutions report in May of 2022? And just share if why or why not. Um, yeah.
Yeah. The answer is absolutely no. Absolutely not. They have not. They haven't even scratched the surface. We knew it was going to be a long game. We knew it was going to take a lot of time. We knew that it wasn't going to be an instant change, and it was going to take time to implement changes and attitudes and implement the actual reform work. We saw that, but instead of that, they just erased it. They just dropped
Hmm.
the ball. They basically set up the entire process to fail. They never intended, in my opinion, never intended for abuse reform to go forward, for anything to actually be productive. They never intended for there to be a live database. Um, Everything was a sham. We see that
Hmm.
now. We saw it during the process because of the games and the red tape and the things that were happening during the process. We witnessed it ourselves, but we also understood that unless the messengers pushed and unless there were a lot of people, like an army of people within the convention, within the executive committee, with all of the decision making powers and the voices within, that it was all going to end, and that in
Hmm.
SBC 25 there would be nothing to vote for, which is exactly what we've seen in 24. Everything ended. It was erased. It was as if, okay, well, it wasn't possible. We've done the work. We tried. It's all done. Everybody go home. And by the way, SBC 25, everybody get excited for Dallas. We left
Hmm.
there feeling like, okay, well, we've been erased. We've also been chastised for showing up, because then the language became so, it was all a sham on us. These survivors, this wasn't even a real
Hmm.
thing. These survivors basically scammed the convention and have cost us all these dollars, and it was all a sham. We read those things. So to all of you pastors who posted those, yeah, you hit your mark. It was painful. It was painful to read because it was erasing us. It was erasing our pain, our stories, our truths. And most of our abusers are admitted abusers. It's not like we were
Yeah.
pulling things out of thin air. Most of them have been convicted, or at least credibly accused, or have come forward admitting their abuses. So it's not like we were just caught lying. No, we were
Yeah.
caught telling the truth, and you were caught building a sham. It was on the other
Hmm.
side, it was the opposite.
Well, that leads me to my next question. In what ways has SBC leadership, failed the messenger's request of the abuse reforms?
The most interesting thing to me is the fact that I don't think the messengers even realize to this day how they were duped. And
Hmm.
they were absolutely duped. They were gaslit all along the way. They were paraded around as if their voice actually mattered. It was as if they were going to listen to the will of the messengers. Um, and let me backtrack for just a second too. I do believe that the messengers 100% heard us. I believe that they believed in the message, and I believe they believed in the
Yes.
reform work that was being presented. So no one can gaslight me out of the fact that the will of the messengers was presented. I saw those ballots go up year after
Yes.
year after year, and it took my breath away every time. I'm glad I was there to see it, because it is a bit of healing and kind of validation in a lot of ways. But the messengers heard, the messengers chose, consciously chose. They weren't led astray by survivors. They voted based on their own emotions, their convictions, and their knowledge. And what happened was leadership in the form of entities and other people that surround them and that kind of really pull the strings of the convention
Hmm.
ignored the will of the messengers. But worse than ignoring, they pretended this faux cooperation. They pretended as if they were going to fulfill the will. But the entire time, they set it all up to where it was going to fail no matter what. It didn't matter how hard the task force tried. It didn't matter how much funds were released, or the amount of monies that were released to them to do the work. It wouldn't have mattered if it had been less or more funds. They were going to withhold every penny of it. None of it was going to be spent on the reform work. And here's an interesting fact on that. If the messengers don't believe that, think about what happened after convention. All of those funds that were allotted, they were allotted, approved of by messengers, voted in, and earmarked for abuse reform work, which would include the database, would include a place for the task force long term, would be the hotline, would set up all of the reform work that had been asked for. They didn't nix any of the plans. They said, nope, we want it all, and here's the monies to do it. The entity leaders then held those funds the entire time. They tied the hands of the task force right behind their backs and said, I want you to go implement this stuff as we put roadblocks in your way, but we're not going to actually fund you to do the work. And you're working for free on top of that. We're going to withhold the monies. And then when the whole sham was said and done, what did they do with those monies? They didn't say we only have this amount left, or we've got 100,000 left, or we spent all the money on reform. No, they said we still have all of the funds, all of them, which is the telltale truth that nobody's recognizing. And we're going to turn those funds now over to the EC to deal with. So now Jeff Orge has control of that money, which was all transferred right out. And nobody thinks about that. It's like that just that's part of the gaslighting, right? It's part of the belief in your leadership, believing that their will is good, believing that their intent is good, and believing that they're doing the right things, while right in front of your noses, they ignore everything you voted for. They don't allow the monies to be used as they were earmarked for, and they tie the hands of everybody involved in the process behind their backs and will not allow reform work to go forward.
Mm, mm. I'm just pausing for a second to even think about that.
It's
um,
heavy.
yeah, yeah. And you mentioned money. Obviously, do you think that was the big? And obviously we've heard that a lot, right? We've heard money, money,
Yeah.
money, money. It's because of money, but it wasn't because of money, was it?
No, they said protect the base. They did say that. I mean, at least that was admitted out loud. Additionally, at the end of convention last year at the press conference, actually, no, it was at one of the EC meetings, it was asked of Jeff Orge, is there any reform work moving forward at this time? Do you have any intention of
Yep.
moving that forward? And I
Yep.
don't have the direct quote right now, but basically it was asked of them. And asked several different ways, by the way, mainly by Liam and Bob, and I believe you asked it
Hmm.
as well.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
each of you asked separately, different wording, whatever, and the answer was no. And they admitted it finally. Finally, they said, no, there's no plan. But did the messengers react? Like each one of these steps, I thought, okay, surely the messengers are going to go, wait a minute, who's calling the shots here? I thought the messenger body was telling the head what to do, but it's not that way at all. You are
Hmm.
still being controlled. Your will does not matter to the general convention. It does not matter.
Hmm.
And it's being
Hmm.
proven over and over again. And until you get angry about that and take control back, there's going to continue to be decisions made that you're not 100% a part of or even behind. And honestly, having your will dismissed like that is the very same thing that's happening to us as survivors. We are being
Hmm.
dismissed. And that's what we continue to tell you during these years of begging for reform work, is that they are dismissing our claims. They're dismissing us, they're overlooking us, they're kicking us and keeping us down in the meantime. But it's the same thing to the messengers. And what that tells you is those things are not of God. So therefore, if the leadership is not acting in the way that they're called to by God, then something needs to change. And that means that leadership
Yeah.
needs to change. It means people need to get their walking papers. Character has the actual goal for character needs to be raised, which it's already biblical, but we need to
Yeah.
actually follow through on it. And don't just keep reading these paper articles or newspaper articles about the leaders that are failing you, that are misusing funds, that are living corrupt lifestyles, that are living lies for large majorities
Hmm.
of their ministry, living double lives.
Hmm.
All of the things that are just being continually put before you, and yet you just keep moving forward as if it's all going to fix itself. And it's not.
Yeah.
There's a seed of darkness and destruction within that convention that needs to be uprooted. And until that happens, we're going to just keep having these conversations.
That's well said. Now, Tiffany, you're not going to be there, but I want you to remind the SBC messengers why sexual abuse issues within the SBC churches. So there, I said, I want people to understand that correctly. Within the SBC churches. So I didn't say within the executive committee or within the seminaries or the institutions. I said within the SBC churches are far from being resolved.
Far, far from being resolved. First, you have to acknowledge the problem. The problem was finally acknowledged. And we believe that. We saw it. We saw that the messengers were finally like, oh, wow, this is a problem, versus the decade before where they didn't even believe it was a problem because they were being told it wasn't.
Hmm.
Then, after it was proven and shown, and there were so many of us, and then the abuse of faith and the guidepost report and all the different things continued to show it, the messengers continued to see it. Entity leaders kept trying to override it by new problems and new chaos. Women in the church, we've got an abundance of female pastors, all this stuff, that all the fluff that they created to downgrade the actual problem that was on the table.
Hmm.
Um, all of those things ended up kind of drowning out our voices, but it didn't stop abuse. Abuse hasn't stopped one iota. It's still happening nonstop. And anyone paying attention to social media or newspaper articles, especially if you're outside of your little circle, um, can see the numbers of survivors still coming forward. Their trauma might have even happened 20 years ago or 10 years ago. I mean, right now we're hearing the Michael Tate issues with the newsboys. We hear church after church, youth leader after youth leader, pastor after pastor being arrested for indecencies, whether it's child pornography or trying to meet
Mm-hmm.
someone or abusing someone within their own church. It doesn't matter. It is an insidious evil that is in our churches. And the reason it's in our churches is because we've allowed it to remain there.
Hmm.
Unless we make it hard for this to happen, and unless we have hard and fast rules and reporting measures and all of the things that are needed, and we are simply absolutely unwilling to allow them to remain in our churches, period, point blank. We don't let them move to another church. We don't let them move into a different ministry. We don't downgrade their pastorate and put them in some other role within the church. They are out, period. Unless those kinds of things come through, we're going to continue to see it. And what I feel is happening is, my entire life being raised in church, and especially within Southern Baptist churches, the world is our enemy, right? Everything's
Hmm.
the world, the world, the world. There are so many problems within the church, especially relating to abuse, that are outside of you can't bring the world into this. This is the church destroying itself. The
Yeah.
people are the church, right? So if the
Yeah.
people are the church and the wolves are just rising and rising and rising, and no one is willing to say, no, you're not allowed here. And that's what the reform work was for, is to create
Hmm.
a giant stopgap. It wasn't going to stop abuse in its tracks. It was just going to create walls and boundaries and a fortress around it that says, we don't allow this here. That
Yeah.
hasn't happened. So because that hasn't happened, we are going to continue to have children, and I include teenagers as children. We are going to
Mm-hmm.
have children in all ministries, in all faith groups, in all churches. It is not untouchable. Your church is not untouchable. It can happen anywhere at any time. It's going to happen within homes, because there is a lot of abuse that happens within homes that are pastors and well-beloved people, and no one listens to the abuses going on. It's going to happen in marriages and families, whether it's sexual abuse or mental, emotional, and financial abuse. We are not drawing a hard and fast line and using the God given scriptures against it.
Hmm.
We're so quick to forgive and forget, unless you disagree with your brother. If you disagree with your brother and he doesn't vote the way you want him to within the convention, then he is your absolute enemy, and you will go and proclaim his death on the internet
Hmm.
10 ways to Sunday until he is no longer a voice. But you won't do that
Hmm.
to an abuser in any way, shape, or form. Even if they admit to abuses, you're going to continue to support them, platform them, put them on your speaking circuits. applaud them, standing ovations, put them in stained glass and in the books, and
Hmm.
just talk about all the good that they've done. There is such a broken system there of
Yeah.
character, values, ethics, and beliefs.
Yeah. And I want to point this out too, because obviously we cover way too much of it. And this is like, it includes all churches, but there's a handful of SBC churches that it includes too. You mentioned some of that. In our line of work, statistically, on average, over one brand new one a day that
A
we
day.
can pull up just through local news sources.
Yeah,
And we don't have the time to write on every one of them.
right.
But that is statistics. And as you have worked as an advocate through this, and I want to bring up something that we didn't quite talk about, but I want you to shine a light on this because I believe that you probably have seen this. The heightened media, I say that an all encompassing aspect of the internet age, the social media age, that, let's go 20 years ago, maybe 30 years ago. Think about the progression and the heightened, you know, um, I'll use the word wolves, as you
Mm.
did,
Yeah.
that are now entering into from seminary because they've been addicted to things that they see on the internet. That maybe they weren't, it was happening 30 years ago. I'm just saying, have you seen, or would you say the uptick now without those boundaries is even more concerning,
It's
right?
yeah, it's easy access too. So you can feed the wolf can feed his carnal desires. I mean, he can just
Yeah.
get online and look and look and look, and then next thing you know, he's not even looking at his youth that are he's ministering to. He's not even looking them as human beings in the image of God. He is looking at them from his eyes of sin that he's in. I mean, this is happening, like you said, if you just daily just watch the news, start Googling in the morning, pastor arrested. Just see where it comes from. It's going to come from, you'll be inundated. And it's going to
Yep.
be not necessarily yet that they were caught abusing a child yet, but they've been abusing them with their eyes because they've been online viewing child pornography. And maybe that's what first takes them down. Make no mistake, if they hadn't been brought down on that, they would have become an abuser. You don't feed yourself that kind of sickness and see it and then not eventually act on it if they haven't already.
Yes.
If they haven't already and are just not caught yet.
Right.
But the
Right.
raids on pornography, because we have task forces behind the scenes, and thank God we have organizations like the Tebow Foundation and a lot of trafficking
Yes.
organizations and things that are on it, that are trying to find these guys, and women. I mean, it's not a male only problem with pornography and child abuse online and
Hmm.
exploitation of children and trading in pornography. I mean, we are inundated with this evil right now. You cannot sidestep it. And there
Yeah.
is, it doesn't matter what church you're a part of. It doesn't matter how great and united your church is and what safety protocols you have in place at your church. And if you have a checklist where you do a background check and all of these things, that's where people get caught up. They think we're safe here. We're doing the right things. Well, you know what a predator looks for? He looks for the people with their guard down. He looks for the church where no one's paying attention because everybody thinks we're good. He looks for the
Yeah.
churches that feel safe because that's what they do. They need to find the places where they can get in, and that's what our reform work was supposed to stop. The reform work was, hey, you know what? If you get caught, you're going in this database, and you're not going to be able to easily move around from ministry to ministry, church to church. You're not going to end up on a mission field somewhere in Uganda because someone in
Yeah.
little rural town Georgia caught you and busted you with the youth, and instead of going to the police and trying to sidestep a scandal, they decided they were going to send you to a mission field. That happens all of the
Hmm.
time. It happened at the school I graduated from. And, that was decades ago. They sent him to Germany after he was found to be a child predator. He was the pastor of the church, principal and founder of our Christian school, K through 12 school, and for decades he was a predator. When they found out, didn't call the police, get the police involved. They quieted and silenced the families. I mean, I've known this since when my abuse happened. I've watched this go on for so long.
Mm.
This is not a now issue. It's always been there. We're just begging you to stand alongside us and stop it.
Yes, yes, yes. Tiffany, you had I would call it a behind the scenes seat, kind of a voice with the task force. You mentioned your work with the task force and that they're handcuffed. They were assigned by the messengers to implement, what the messenger's voice was. A lot of that you've already shared. Did you witness, at your time with that? Because I know you were close with a lot of them and worked, hand in hand, spent many hours hand in hand with them. Did you ever witness pushback within SBC leadership for implementing or attempting to implement abuse reform? So one of the things that you and I have always talked about is like the database. How easy a database would be to make, right? That's not hard,
Yep.
you know. So, did you ever see the pushback, the handcuffs, as you mentioned, in your time in working like with them?
I absolutely did. I saw it all the way through, and it was the most frustrating process because you know the clock's running out. I mean, there's no doubt about it that there was a time frame presented to the messengers for this work to be done, and a report given to the messengers the year before, and then they voted to continue moving forward. So we get another year, and we celebrated that, but we knew that clock's ticking. And if these
Hmm.
things don't get done, then we knew that at the end of last year, at that convention, if there were not some concrete items to move forward on, to vote on moving forward, because as the SBC works, you've got to vote 2 years in a row for something to be able to move forward and to happen. Um,
Yep.
we knew even 4 months in, clock's ticking, clock's ticking, clock's ticking. And there were so many roadblocks just those first few months of work. And then the task force, kind of gained some ground, and they begin really working, and they're running with it, and they've got cooperation from certain people, and they're going to produce a curriculum, and they're going to do this other thing. And in the meantime, they're working on insurances, and then they're working on finding a place to build the database and a platform for it. And then literally there was a moment I remember where there's not going to be time to put all these names in, like to go and vet all of these things and to try to take the time to make sure that whoever we put in, because we can't fail at this. If there's one person that
Hmm.
ends up in there, one name that shouldn't be, or that wasn't credibly accused enough, then they're going to bring the whole thing down, because we knew we had all of the naysayers that were just looking for the reason to stop it. Um, but I remember that moment where they were like, we don't even have enough time to put names in there. And I remember myself even saying, I'll volunteer my time. Like, there's plenty of people to bring into this to help vet it, to help enter names once you do your work, all of those things. But then at that point in time, all of the roadblocks to actually being able to list names began, and all of the fodder and discussions on public media about, we can't afford to accuse the wrong person and put the wrong name in. They need to be not credibly accused. They've got to come from law enforcement. Well, if we wait for law enforcement, we're not gaining any ground. That's where we are now. There's people
Hmm.
do background
Hmm.
checks all of the time. Churches do background checks before they hire somebody, and if they haven't been criminally, first of all, even if they have been criminally accused and then caught, interviewed, arrested, charged, does
Hmm.
not mean that those charges stick. It does not mean that they go to jail and have a prison sentence, or that they are listed publicly in record as even being arrested necessarily. There's so many
Yeah.
loopholes and things. They can get that buried. There's so many things. That's just a whole nother discussion that we try to tell people, to educate people, that just saying I do a background check is not enough. So then, the wheels begin to push back on being able to enter the credibly accused names. So we spend a whole lot of time, months and months go by with them not even be able to implement the credibly accused. Now, the game was always to run out the clock. I could
Hmm.
I could sit here for hours and tell you the stumbling blocks, and I can't even tell them as well as the task force members themselves can. They hit wall upon wall upon wall, and Josh Wester tried to say that in the best way he could, without telling all, which I wish he would have told all, and he knows that I wish he would have told
Hmm.
all. Every task member is fully aware of my stand on what should have been said at that meeting. And in fact, we stood in the lobby of that hotel, and this hasn't been said anywhere publicly. We stood in the lobby before that address was given, and I was in the middle of the task force members. It just happened upon them. It wasn't a planned thing. And I kind of joined into the crowd. I was actually on my way to the survivor room at the moment that this happened. And they were kind of gathering, having their final moments of discussion and prayer before they went. And I began to press upon them, you have to tell everything. You cannot skirt it. You cannot get up there and dance around it. And there was a lot of discussion going on around, and I don't know any other way to say this, but it would be career suicide for any one of them to tell
Mm,
the actual truth. Within the SBC, it would be suicide
mm,
because we know how the machine works. You've got to watch Twitter for 5 minutes and you know who gets blacklisted and who gets castigated and who is found to be not even a Christian and whatever, and they will ruin your ministry
mm.
if you're not on their side or if you don't say what they want or play their games. And they encompasses a lot of people, right? It's just the way that it works. And they could probably say the same thing about us as survivors. You know, if you step out of line, we're going to make sure everybody is aware of it and knows it. But we're telling the truth. That's the thing. And that's what I
Yeah.
was calling the
Yeah.
task force to do. Tell the truth about what's happened. And I was not the only one asking. There were all kinds of survivors, different advocates, other news outlets. And I'm sure you even asked
Hmm.
a lot of those questions.
Hmm.
What happened? What went wrong?
Yeah.
Why are we here? And those were very legitimate questions that the messengers deserved answers to. And I think the onus and the pressure on Josh Wester and Mike Keybone and all of the task force members was nearly impossible from the start to ever achieve anything. And it was absolutely impossible without just signing their death knell within the SBC to name names. And
Mm,
if we could sit with that for just a minute, because it makes
mm.
me emotional, it makes me so angry. If telling the truth and exposing lies and darkness and deceptions and problems within your SBC means that you're blacklisted, then what are we standing
Hmm.
for? If we are
Hmm.
not exposing
Yes.
darkness to light, then what is the point? And then I join in with
Hmm.
the burn it down. Burn it down. If we are not willing to do what is right as a people, if any church is not willing to stand against evil and darkness and stand alongside the abuse, which is what Jesus says to do, and to make sure that we are walked with, that we receive justice, that we receive mercy. And that mercy to me is in the form of, I see you, I hear you, and you're not alone. We're going to stand with you. That's a mercy that most of us were not given, which is why we stay in the trauma bonds, and that's why we stay
Yeah.
in situations where we can't be fully healed and whole and healthy, because we're still fighting to even be believed and heard, much less to seek justice. But we know
Yeah.
what God commands of us, and within the SBC as an institution, it is about protecting that base. It is about climbing that ladder, whether that's the speaking engagements or being seen within the networks as a positive church versus a church that doesn't agree with your politics, or a church that doesn't agree with your stance, or isn't a 9 marks, or isn't a whatever, whatever the parameter is for whatever faction.
Hmm.
If you don't play
Yeah.
along, you're the enemy. That's not what God calls us to. But that's what continued to happen. And
Right.
so for the task force, they were backed into a corner and backed up against a wall. They had their hands tied. They pretty much were hogtied because they also were not allowed to tell the
Mm,
truth. Um, they couldn't call anyone to account. So without that ability, there was no moving forward, because if you can't fix the problems that are there, and if you see and realize, which they did, that they're never going to allow this,
hmm.
where
Hmm.
is there to go from there for them?
Yeah.
So they wasted all of those hours and time away from their families and the emotional toll and all of the wreckage that I will acknowledge the task force members went through. They went through hell. They really did. Not nearly the level of hell we've gone through, and they'll easily admit that,
Right.
but they still went through their own level of it, and it was a setup. And I've voiced that to them.
Mm.
It was a setup from it was a sham and a setup, and I'm sorry that you were set up this way. But now that you were, and now that you see it, please tell the people, because without that, the messengers are not going to vote any different, do any different. They're not going to rise up. And so I still hope that maybe somebody will write a summary. Maybe the task force as a whole will write a
Yeah.
summary of what really happened and bullet point some names and some problems. And if not them, someone else. I don't know who, but the truth needs to be told.
Mm. You make me think. So let's say that you're given the mic and you had a spot right in front, not in a back room. Tiffany is on the stage at the annual meeting in front of thousands of the messengers there. It starts on Tuesday. What would you tell them? What would you say?
A lot of what I've already said, to be honest, but I think I would start with to the messengers, would be probably where I would start, because that to me is the heartbeat of this whole thing right now.
Hmm.
Um, Forget what hasn't been done and forget the fact that there's corrupt leadership and that there's people that don't want this to move forward. But what are the messengers going to do about it? Because without them rising up, there's nothing else. If it's just going to all continue. So I'd probably ask, um, scripturally, he reveals the deep and secret things. And we know this. And God says that he does bring darkness to light. That's been done. Check. We've done it.
Hmm.
We've done it for years. You've seen it. You voted for it. Several years in a row, you were all for it. So many churches even threatened to pull funding if they didn't do it in years prior. There was a groundswell of that for a while. I got a lot of private messages about that too, I will say. But I would say to the messengers, the things have been revealed to you. You put it on your leadership to do what was right with that information. And you said, we don't want this in our house. We don't want
Hmm.
this here. We don't approve of it. We don't buy into it. And, there's also scripture where God speaks of the iniquity and it being in your hands. And he says, if iniquity is in your hands, put it far away from you, far away, push it out. Don't
Yeah.
let it be in your tents. Well, it's in the tents of the SBC. It's in the tents, and there's encampments around the tents, and there's wagons circling those tents to make sure that it stays exactly how it is. And that makes me angry. And it should make the
Hmm.
messengers angry, because we're not supposed to do that.
Yes.
I would say to them, when are you going to get angry? When are you going to take your voice back? Because you have been duped, you've been gaslit, you have been told that they are doing your will when they absolutely are not. It has been right under your noses, and they've flaunted it right in front of you that they're not doing it. When are you going to get angry? And then to the leaders that are doing these things, that know exactly what they're doing, and
Hmm.
they just know that they're not going to be called out. They have immunity because no one's going to do anything about it. And they also know, because they've watched their other brothers, they can do a lot of things wrong, including some things that have gone on with seminaries just in recent
Hmm.
days, things that have gone in the last couple of years where a lot of financial issues have been exposed. Whatever the case may be, you just keep moving forward. As Dr. Vine said to me when I outed him about lying in the book, about me, he said, Tiffany, given a little time, these things just tend to wash over. They just get brushed over, they go away. That is the mentality of SBC leadership, and I believe that that is almost like a core principle, is just give it a little bit of time. Just give it a little bit of time and it'll go away. That is how we were seen as survivors within the convention. It was said to me on many occasions, I'm sure others heard it too, but for me personally, it was said to me that in meetings, it was even said of entity leaders, of other pastors that work in these little factions with some kind of say and power, they'll go away eventually. They'll go away. They knew it was going to die out. That was the plan, is smoke us out, run down the clock, wait till it all blows over, and then we can get back to business as usual. So to them, I say, fear the Lord, because
Mm,
God says he will not be mocked. He says that he will not allow injustice and iniquity to continue. So I say to you entity leaders, and I wish I could just name your names right now, but you know who you are. Um, you should be in fear of a holy father. And the people of this convention should rise up and remind them of who they need to be afraid of and take some of their rights and responsibilities and inactions and deceptions. Take it out from under them. Don't allow this to happen in your tents, in your house, in your
mm,
religious base, whether it be the SBC or any other denomination. It should be true of all of us within the church. And then to survivors, I would say that's probably the hardest part. By not going, we did not give up. It felt like
mm,
giving up, but by not taking a stand there, it does not mean that reform work is done. It just means that it's like when God says, not to cast your pearls before swine. That's what it feels like right now. We were pearls going in there to warn that convention inside and out. And I don't mean just because we were there present. I mean, every survivor and advocate who spoke to this, whether it be social media, whether it be going to their local church and telling their stories, or going to law enforcement, anybody who was rising up and the ones who couldn't, we were all the pearls before the swine. We should have never been
mm,
damaged in the first place. Our faith never should have been tainted this way. It should have never been asked of us to carry it forward in secrecy and silence. We should have been protected. We should have never faced abuse within our faith groups. And the church should have surrounded us with their comfort and their care, seeking justice. And because the SBC is refusing to do that, that is why we're not back this year. That's why
mm,
the few of us who were still coming will not come any longer. And what's even sadder is that for those of us who were continuing to go, when other survivors would say, we want to come this year, we told them, you do what's necessary for you. And if you feel like that's part of your healing is to show up there. But let me tell you, it is traumatic. It is life destroying. It harms
mm.
us. We are walking right back into the den of thieves that abused us. Not necessarily our abusers, but for some of us, they are. They walk right across our paths, or at least they're still beloved and known and they're in the speaking circuits. But it is not life-giving to walk into that place. So
Yeah.
to the general convention and to the survivors, I would say it is better for us not to be there. And that's
Mm,
what they counted on. They counted on pushing us out and us not showing up, and for the media not to care anymore, and all of those things. So now it's in the messenger's hands. Will you speak for us? Will you continue to do what needs to be done to keep us safe and to keep future generations safe, so that you can be and do the things that God called you to be and do?
yes. Yes. Thank you for that. Thank you for that's powerful. Thank you. And it's not easy.
And it's,
Um,
yeah,
wow.
it feels
Wow.
like a why. Why would you even speak to it? Why? And even when you and I discussed talking about this, I kept saying,
Hmm.
I don't know why there's, it feels like there's nothing left to say, but yet there is.
Yeah.
There's so much to say,
Yes.
but it just feels
Yes.
defeating.
Yeah. No, it's understandable, and I'm sorry for that. As we conclude, I want to conclude with this last question, and it's not an easy one. Um, SBC Jennifer survivor Jennifer Lyle just unexpectedly passed this weekend. I know she meant a lot to you. You guys were friends. What would you want people to know about her?
Um, Jennifer, I have to go back here because I just read this not long ago, but Rachel said it best. Jennifer was so much more than this, you know, than what was done to her. Um, First of all, I'd like to remind the convention that she was one of yours. She was one of your people. You cultivated and rose her up and stood underneath her and helped her, as she grew within community within the SBC. and became a Lifeway executive and did all of the great things that she did. She was beloved by everyone who ever crossed her path. And she was a bright light, and she was tenacious, and she was strong and witty, and so many beautiful things. And I hate to even bring any darkness into this, but you ate your own. You
Hmm.
literally chewed her up and spit her out. And it is the perfect image of what has happened to all of us. Um, we have been chewed up and spit out. And I hate more than anything the cost for Jennifer, what it cost her to stand and to tell her truth. And her truth was admitted to by David Sills, as we all know, in his public record. And then they still came for her. He and the others still came for her just to make sure that they kept her down. And you didn't win. You didn't win. Jennifer now is at peace. She's safe. And she's with her Savior, who always had her back and who was always protecting her and loving her. And in honor of Jen and Dwayne Rollins,
Hmm.
and for Trey as well, Trey Carlock, for so many other survivors that we've lost, we will not give up. We might fall backwards in the battle at times and we might have to take breaks, but we will not let your light be extinguished.
Yeah, thank you. And Tiffany, I got to ask you, Dr. Orge just, newest, within a year, he was named last year as the president of the executive committee, which kind of, is behind the leadership of all of this. If you kind of look at that, he put a statement out on Jennifer. I want to read it and then I want you to respond to it. Um, Dr. Orge said, Jennifer Lyle's death is tragic and heartbreaking. My heart goes out to everyone who loved and cared for her because of the magnitude of their loss today. While her life was marked by much pain and turmoil, now she knows only peace and rest. The eternal good news of the gospel is our only source of hope today, and we are grateful for the sure hope it provides. What would you say to that comment?
It's a tough one. So I'm glad that he acknowledged the devastation and turmoil that's marked her life. Um, I'd love for it to be stated as to what turmoil and devastation marked her life and why and who, which leaders, and why are those leaders still even names in the SBC that are used. Um, but then I want to see action. We talk about this so much. We are so sick of words. They're not even pretty anymore. They're like a stench. It's like God saying, you bring your burnt offerings and they're a stench to me. I understand that in his position, he has to address it and give words to it. And the president, I'm sure, will say something, Clint Presley. Um, but to honor Jen would be to do something. That's the way to honor that devastation and turmoil over her life, is to make sure that doesn't happen to anyone else. Make sure that we stop it. We do everything in our power to make sure, and that when an entity leader, a pastor, a youth pastor, a missionary, whoever it is within your Southern Baptist churches abuses someone and admits to it, let's continue to point that out. Again, this is another admitted abuser. You do everything in your power to make sure that their legs are cut out from under them as far as being able to stand up and bring a lawsuit against you. You, the way that you handle their dismissal matters and protects you later in a lawsuit. Making sure that it is brought to light why they are being let go, what happened, what protocols and procedures were used to fire them. Do not let them step down from leadership. Don't ask them to quietly leave or to put out some ministry statement of being called to another ministry. Publicly denounce their sin and their crimes and their actions so that you don't later have to defend yourself. And if we have a precedent for that, then we wouldn't have room for these guys to then go and file lawsuits, the Johnny Hunts and the David Sills, to file lawsuits to say, even though I did do these things and I admit to them, I'm going to sue you because you brought that darkness to light. We've got to stop that in the tracks. And the way to do that is by it not being a one-off that these guys are called forward. Make it
Yeah.
so that it is a pattern that the minute you are found out and then a survivor comes forward, you are publicly denounced and shamed so that they know that the minute they do it, this is going to happen to them, so that it makes a fear of doing it, that it brings a level of accountability forward, not afterwards, because that rarely ever happens. They end up just walking away and popping up somewhere else in ministry. Make it a pattern to where they're called out and scripturally put before the people to say they are no longer qualified. That is not harming your brother, that's helping them. That's telling them that sin is not
Mm,
acceptable here. That is not a, it could happen to any of us kind of statement. I hear that sometimes with pastors, it's kind of like, but by the grace of God go I. No, no, no. That's how you keep it from happening, is saying that this will never happen. This is not okay. This is not good, by keeping your life pure before God and doing the right things and not compromising. And if you have that mentality, and I'm sure a lot of people do, maybe reevaluate. If you think you could fall in that way by harming another human being in abusive ways, then you
yeah.
shouldn't be in ministry in the first place. But let's take
That's a
good
good
and
point.
hard looks at ethics and morals, and let's make a stand against them like we claim to do.
Mm,
There's all of the talk of, and I don't even know if I should bring it up, but the talk of Mike Stone not being president. I almost tweeted something today about that. Mike Stone did not become president because hundreds and thousands of people voted for him not to become president. It
hmm
was not because of something that happened in a vestibule of a church. It was not a setup by Russell Moore. It was not a emotion-driven abuse crisis that the survivors were creating. It was none of those things. If you believe in the system of the SBC and you think that everything works the way it's supposed to, and you think your machine is fine and good, then Mike Stone and all the others should be happy with the results because the machine worked the way it was supposed to, because the messengers voted. Just like the messengers voted for the reform work and for the funds and for the support and care for survivors that was completely dismissed and ignored. The system works. It just dependent on the leadership as to whether or not they allow it to happen.
mm. Well said. Well said, Tiffany. And I got to say it again, thank you. Thank you for this. Thank you again. Thank you for your voice. Never give up. I know it's not easy. Uh, and you always have a voice here. So thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you so much, Jesse.